everyone. Welcome to Open Mind Night, a show that talks about everything mental health and mental illness related. I'm your host, Robin Tamanaha, licensed marriage and family therapist. Joining me on this episode is my guest, Marian Formanes, licensed marriage and family therapist. Her pronouns are she, her. She is a Filipino American art therapist in private practice in California, an HSP, highly sensitive person, and cat mama. I love that one. Hi, Marian.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for being here.
Hey. Oh, quick correction. My last name is Formanes.
Formanes, thank you. Sorry about that. You know what's weird? I don't know why, but I sometimes tend to pronounce words like the Japanese way, even though I'm not fully fluent in Japanese. Sorry about that. Anyway, thank you for correcting me.
Your Filipino accent. I'm like, wait, I didn't really know Tagalog, but I'm like, where did that come from?
So thanks for doing this. I'm really excited to have you on and talk about a bunch of different stuff, specifically your specialties and the things, the clients that you work with. I want to talk about the HSP stuff because I know like that is like something that I think I learned more about like in 2020. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about art therapy, right? Kind of like, could you explain kind of what art therapy is and how that differs from talk therapy, which I think what people usually think of when they think of therapy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So I went to graduate school for art therapy and my MFT license. So kind of them together using the processing you might use with talk therapy. But the unique thing about art therapy is that it uses art materials to further the therapy process. So we're processing at the same time and there's art making. And I use the word art making. I don't say like, oh, we're going to create like an art masterpiece or anything. So I really try to let people know it's like you don't need any art experience to engage in art therapy. You know, any art level is great. I might talk to people about if they've had any adverse art experiences, like maybe they've had like a mean art teacher growing up and like, I don't want to do art anymore. I'm not good at it. And I try to encourage them like any art level is great. Um, and I usually say like, one of the phrases I say is use colors, lines, and shapes to express what you're feeling. So it in some ways lets people off the hook. Colors, lines, and shapes. We can make kind of circles. I've had clients make really like meaningful work from just like circles. Talking about their family or something. So no need to feel like, oh, I'm gonna draw stick figures. I'm like, great. I draw stick figures too. So I really encourage people to, not feel intimidated by the art process. It's more for us to find deeper meaning with our therapeutic processing along with talk therapy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like too how you said art making, because you're right, it can feel intimidating or like, you know, like you said, people might have experience with like art class or worried about like how good of like an artist, they are, but really this is not what it's about, right? It's actually something that's very therapeutic and healing. Is it something that adults could use as well? Or what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually started with a lot of child experience and then I transitioned to working with adults, but it does work for both populations. I might do, some different type of interventions with adults, and maybe not so much glitter and stickers, but if you love glitter, cool. Well, we could use that with adults. But kind of the basic three art materials I've been taught to start with is like markers, colored pencils, and oil pastels. So those are the three that I usually start with, see how people are, and then we can also add things like collage, which is just like magazine image cutouts that I kind of curate or like put together for you to choose. And some adults really enjoy that because like I don't have to make anything, I just choose an image and I glue it. Great. So that's some of the ways that I may engage with art therapy with adults. And like I said, it's just for deeper processing. For some people, if they're used to a script, they're used to saying the story about their childhood. They may not get into deeper processing because they got the script, but if we go into it using art, then different things may come up for them, or they may discover, oh wow, okay, I didn't even realize that, because we're using the other part of the brain to access that.
That is really cool. Yeah, you're right. Because there's like the left part and the right part, right? And they do different things. So it actually touches on another part, which helps kind of take it to a deeper level, it sounds like, and really unearth and process some more stuff, which is wonderful. Now that, I can't believe we're like over 2 years into this pandemic and us doing like the video life, work from home life. Um, what does it look different, or what does it look like, with like video therapy? I think a lot of people, now we're continuing to use video therapy, but like as far as like when it's art therapy, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think that presented really unique challenges, especially having to adjust, like all of us, to it quickly. So I think what I've done, just when I had started, I was like, okay, what do you got at home? Do you have pens? Do you have highlighters and crayons hanging around? And we use, just what paper, kind of computer printer paper, whatever they have. And then usually when I have them making art, I observe the art making experience. So usually I stay pretty quiet while they're doing it, so they have a chance to go into the experience. And I ask them to kind of tilt their camera down. If someone's really tech savvy, they put two cameras, but usually like, can you tilt it down so I could kind of see, how they're engaging with art. So if if they do this part and then they kind of wait a while, they think, they do this part, or if they do it like really hurriedly. So that's the part of like why I would like to see the art process. It's not a terms of judgment, and so it's also guiding them along that. And I always like to tell people as well, art therapy is not, I'm not going to like interpret it. It's not going to be like tarot cards or anything. So if you're like, hey, what does this mean? That's not exactly what we do. So what we do is like, after you're done creating, I might observe like, oh, I noticed you used like the blue right away. Like, how did you know to use the blue? Or what does this part mean to you? So I don't tell you blue means blah, 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 you know? So it's for them to go further into the experience and explore what it means for them, using the art. So we do kind of talk processing after the art making, in regards to the art.
That is really neat. I think, yeah, with colors and or just anything, like I think as therapists, it's important for us to do that, like, because it can mean different things for different people, right? Whether it's
Mm-hmm.
the colors or like how fast they're moving or not. And really like we kind of observe that and just like invite them to share what it means, what their experience is. Yeah. And two, that also, this also goes to show, I think when the pandemic originally happened, those who were not doing video therapy before, there was some questions on like what it would look like in general. And it sounds like, including with art therapy, it's just through a different means, but it's doing the same things. It's just through video. And so it's very much doable, right?
Yeah, I would say the one thing that I miss, which, I think there's different trade offs to video versus in person, is being able to provide like the art materials for people. So, if I'm hearing that they're going through this certain thing, I'm like, oh my gosh, this material would be great. Let's bring it out of my closet and can use it with them. But
Yeah.
we don't always have access to that. And also, setting out art materials and having it set up a certain way, extends the therapeutic container. So they feel like taken care of. There's a sense of like, okay, like I always tell them like, oh, should I clean up? I'm like, it's okay. That's my job to help contain, what you've expressed here. So that's the thing I miss a little bit. Like I'm like usually the artwork in person, I will take and put in their own folder to let them know that I'm holding on to it, kind of keeping this confidentiality. In some ways, if it's a really deep artwork, sometimes it feels really great for clients. Like, oh, I made this, please take it. Like, I don't want to touch it anymore. So I have put it out. Like, if clients are like, this artwork's so deep, I'm like, you can mail it to me if you want. No one's taking me up on that. But, that is a way of extending the therapeutic container. Is like, I can take this artwork and we can keep it in a spot that's, safe. And we could return to it if you want, or we can never return to it if that's what you want as well. But so I think that's another helpful thing to have. And I think I was actually thinking about, and I think this is something I'm going to be doing, is creating an art box for my clients that's curated. So when we begin therapy, I get a sense of what they're going through and what certain art materials may best help support them. So if it's looser materials like watercolor, or, of course, those basic threes I talked about, including that in the container so that could be the therapeutic container that I'm sending to them. So they can kind of open it up and, oh, okay, these are the things, Marian, that would kind of help me with my goals. And also they'll have like a sketchbook or a place to put those like things that come up in therapy and say, okay, it's in the box. So that's another containment for them. So I'm working on that, and I think it'll be really helpful for my clients. They have more to access than like maybe colored pencils they just purchased for themselves.
I think that's a wonderful idea. And it's too like kind of like you said, like it's curated for the individual client, right? I know like in general, kind of like subscription boxes became a thing all of a sudden. I almost think of it similar in that sense, where you kind of, it's like something for you that like gets delivered, but in this case it's something therapeutic and it's specific to like your therapy work with them. That is really, really neat.
Yeah, I get excited about subscription boxes. So I can imagine someone opens it like, oh, whoa, what did I get from my therapist? So it's a way of still having that connection, even though we're physically not together. It's like, oh, this is something that I created for you that's coming for you.
Yeah, I think that sounds like too a really wonderful way to like establish rapport even. I feel like. Yeah. Yeah. So I have a lot of questions about HSP. Um,
Go for it.
and I think I don't know if it's me because like being a therapist, I do know some information on it, but I think it's still kind of coming around in general. And I kind of wonder if there are people who maybe are HSP, but they might not know. Could you explain what HSP is?
Yeah, that's cool. Okay. That's a
Really
big.
very loaded question.
Well, I think, first I'll start off as highly sensitive people, letting people know it's not a diagnosis. So it's not depression, it's not PTSD. It is like a temperament type that makes up 15 to 20% of the population. So since it's such a big percentage, it's not a diagnosis. It's just our brains functioning differently than perhaps other people are. I think a lot of research comes from Elaine Aron. So I read her books, and that's what's informed my work with clients. And then finding out myself, I'm like, oh, I'm an HSP. All right. So I have this lived experience of like, that totally makes sense. That makes sense. Before I would do like Myers-Briggs, and I know some people are like really identify with that. And I felt like, oh yeah, that works for me. But when I heard about HSP, I was like, yeah, that really works for me. And I can learn how to adjust my life to fit the temperament I have. So I think
Yeah,
that's different.
yeah, that makes sense. And us being adults, I think what comes to mind is like work, because that's like predominantly what, or maybe even family, but like work, how does that like come into play, or does it pose any particular challenges like HSP and kind of like work?
Yeah, and I think that's something I've experienced as well. And just running through real quickly the kind of basic four categories for HSPs. It's the DOES acronym, DOES. So make sure I don't screw up these letters, but I know the generally. So D means depth of processing. So if you find that you're thinking about things a lot more than like maybe people around you, like it takes you a while to like make a decision, that's kind of depth of processing. You may need time to do more of that. And then O stands for overstimulation. So if you notice your environment with like bright lights or loud noises and you feel like kind of overwhelmed by that more than other people, then that could be a sign that like you're an HSP. And it's different than anxiety. It's just kind of noticing like, oh wow, I'm more affected by these things. Or maybe, wow, I feel tired all of a sudden. So there might be that feeling of that and you're like, what, why? You know? And then E means for empathy. So if you feel like you're a very empathetic person, you feel like maybe you cry at certain movies or things like that, that maybe other people are like, oh, it's okay. If you might notice that you maybe feel more emotional than other people, in your life. And then S stands for sensory. I think I had to get that one. But I think it's similar to O, is where like you might notice like, you will make this environment perfect if I turn on this light, or something like that. Like you're really attuned to your environment.
Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to your work question, is like, say, for example, you have like, open cubicles at work. So you hear all the noises, you hear all the conversations, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's getting hard to focus. Or maybe you don't think it's hard to focus, but in the day you're like, why am I so depleted? I didn't, do too much, or like, or if you're getting constant interruptions at work, and you do work where you really have to like think deeply, but someone comes in and has a question and you're all tracking like, okay, you have to get back, into the swing of things, that can be really disruptive for HSP more than someone who isn't. So there are some things to adjust for that. And I also think of like, for example, like when I worked at the hospital, like you're going from like one room to another. There's a lot of different things going on in a hospital. Like, how do you recalibrate? How do you get your grounding? So I was talking to Robin about this earlier. Something helpful is just if you have the chance to close your eyes for 30 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
If there's a place where you could just, it's a little bit to kind of reduce that stimulation, get a little bit grounded, and
Yeah.
just have a little breath, and then return to your workday.
Yeah. Kind of like you said, like the recalibration in a way, kind of doing different, something like that, and engaging in something like that to kind of help with that process. Cause yeah, like all the four things you described, like, especially if someone's experiencing like all of them or like, different intensities of it, like that's a lot. That sounds like a lot in general. And then like, in a work environment, where maybe it's demanding or there's a lot happening and stimulation while you're having this like internal process, that's a lot to manage, it sounds like, you know?
Yeah. So I think even finding out that you're HSP can be very, very validating for a person in a work environment. Oh man, why can't I be as productive as my other coworkers? Or why am I having a hard time? So I think it can be very validating. And I suggest people take Elaine Aron on her website has like the self test that you could take to say, hey, are you highly sensitive? So I think that's really helpful. It's really easy kind of test. But to get a better sense of like, oh, okay, I might be. Let me look further into it. And I think that's kind of around how I found out for myself. I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, yeah, I'm empathetic, and etc. But then as they ask different questions, like, yeah, that makes sense for me. So I think, it's just even finding out that that's something that may apply to you, and
Mhm.
then being empowered to be like, oh, okay, so it's not a default that I have. It's just like my brain and my body function differently. And
Right.
how can I adjust for that?
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense, actually. Yeah. And two, um, since we're speaking about jobs, I can't help but think about jobs within like the Asian American community, or even expectations. Sometimes there's some of that from family. But yet those, I'm speaking kind of more of like, maybe not everybody, but maybe some like have, the expectations that they, like you mentioned hospital, right? Like I think of like nurses and doctors, like that's super demanding or like really like working like 40-hour work weeks or, but yet that would be a hard fit, as an HSP, you know?
Yeah. I think, generalizing, of course, it's hard to encapsulate, all of the Asian American experiences or even immigrant experiences, is that there may be expectation of like just productivity or working over like emotional experience. So for example, I was called a sensitive kid by my family. So it's like, okay, well, where does that place me? If I'm very sensitive and it's hard, I may have more emotions about something. and as I'm going about trying to do school and like, so how does my family think about my emotions? How do they interact with me when they see me experiencing these that may be different than how they're experiencing it? And then makes them wonder, like, okay, what kind of job can she have if she's this emotional kiddo? She's, she's having all these experiences. Like, what does that look like for her? Maybe it's not being a nurse, and maybe, well, I think nurses are very empathetic as well, but like, in certain environments, making them wonder, like, what could fit for her. Or even worse, or not, I don't want to say worse, but even more challenging is parents or family that want to shut down that part of an HSP and say, don't be emotional. What's wrong with you? Like, snap out of it. How does a HSP that's Asian or an immigrant, how do they, um, come to terms with that?
Yeah. Yeah, especially if it's like, because you're feeling all these things, right? And you're having this internal process and experience, but yet you may not be in like a system or, household or family that really like talks about things or addresses it like that. That sounds really tough, but yet you're experiencing these things. Like, what a really odd experience. Wow.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think that can be, the challenge with being kind of Asian American or immigrant is these certain rules or beliefs from the culture about the way you should be, which doesn't always feel congruent with being an HSP or even acknowledging that you're HSP. So there might be a little bit of denial, like, really? You have to try harder. So there's a sense of like, should I kind of just be my nature of being HSP or do I follow along with my family? It doesn't have to be just a dichotomy. But I think that's what comes up for a lot of my clients is that tension of like, who am I? Who should I be? And how do I still be connected to my family even though it doesn't quite fit what they expect me to be?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's still a long way to go, but and it's and I always find it so interesting because like we are human and we have emotions like all of us do, right? In some sort of way with different emotions, and we're affected by different things, understandably, by what we go through. But yeah, it's very difficult if there isn't an environment that really just acknowledges that. And I think it sounds like maybe for some clients it's kind of doing that, themselves. And then, yeah, then the giant question then becomes like, how does this fit into my life? Or how do I navigate these relationships now? Because this is very much a part of me and, I resonate with or identify with. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I encourage them also to think about maybe later on in our work is building a community. Maybe finding out, like getting to know other HSPs or joining like an HSP Facebook group. So then they feel like they have that support, even though if people in their lives are non-HSPs. And, it's quite possible that there's a lot of other, the 80% of the population that's non-HSP that they find people are also HSPs like, whoa, I think that's another thing that feels very healing is they find someone that's okay. Wow, you experience the world like I do, and to have that community, or even find non-HSP friends that want to learn more, or even family that want to learn more, and then like get it, like oh okay, like your brain works this way, or this environment is most helpful for you. So how can I support you? So that's something I also encourage my clients to do is build that so it just doesn't feel like the singular experience of like, I'm an HSP. Okay. So this is just me. So they have that connection. And then, it's fun to learn also other hacks from other HSPs. Like, oh, like I think I was looking for like earphones the other day and I went to my community and asked like, okay, which one's like really friendly for that? It's like HSP thing is like sometimes like certain sensations, like a tag on our clothing can bother us. So to have those recommendations from my community is like great. I love doing that, like getting, oh yeah, this one worked really well for me. I'm like, oh, try that out.
Yeah. Support is so huge and understanding from others. I wonder if there's any like support groups? Like, I know there's like Facebook, there's like a lot of Facebook groups for different topics, which is wonderful. I wonder if there's any like virtual groups out there for HSP.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there are groups. I think there was an 8-week group that I actually engaged with myself. It was not a therapy group. It was like a psychoeducational group, a support group where we can
Mhm.
connect with each other, and there was facilitators. So that was a really wonderful experience because each week you would get like recordings of like, here's something to listen to about a different aspect of being HSP.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, so
The
there's lots
tag.
of resources.
I'm sorry, what?
I just said there are lots of resources.
Yeah. The tag thing is such a good point. I think I remember at one point there was like I forgot the name of the brand, although I think it was for kiddos, but it was like a tagless clothing brand too, because that is bothersome.
Nice.
So I wonder if there's like more and more of those, out there that like, because who wants to deal with a tag? And two, if you're very sensitive and like more tactile with it, then that's like super bothersome, even if you cut it, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so if more brands could get aware of that, and also mention there's like celebrities that are HSP. If that interests people, like Alanis Morissette, she's a pretty big like celebrity that acknowledges that she's a HSP. So for someone to also feel, like, oh man, HSP is going to hinder my life. I mean, look at what she's done with her career,
Yeah.
and also acknowledging she's a HSP. So just one of those things for people to get that validation and to like understand it's not something that's going to hinder you. Recognizing that you're HSP, but there's like adjustments you can make to make it like flow more, be easier for you to kind of navigate the world.
Yeah. As you described those four categories earlier, um, I was listening and, you know, you were describing maybe some like, challenges, but like the other part of me, as I was like processing what you were saying, as you're saying it was like that there might be like a lot of positives too and living like to experience the world in that way, like to be like so empathetic. Like I think it sounds like there's like also multiple positives, even though there are maybe some challenges, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's also what I encourage my clients to see is like, yes, there are challenges and it comes kind of as a package deal. There's challenges, but also you get these awesome things as well that maybe other people in your life, non-HSPs, don't have. You could share with them, So I know sometimes you feel guilty, like, oh, I wish my partner didn't have to adjust to me being this and this or having to think through decisions. Like they would really feel down about that. I was like, yeah, and that's something we could help work through or communication skills or whatever you need, and you also have these things that you bring to the relationship, so instead of thinking, oh, I'm a burden to my friends and my family, just like, okay, yeah, there are all these things that we have that are things that we can adjust to and learn how to interact with each other, and you have these things that maybe not everyone else does.
Definitely. Definitely. Was there anything I like didn't ask about that you want to bring up or mention?
I think one of the things is like sometimes people just ask like, what, going back to art therapy, is like, well, what is it like? Like, what are you gonna do with me? Like, am I just gonna draw for you? Like, I think that's usually the sense. I've gotten that question as well, and like, I think kind of basically how running through is like, first we kind of do an assessment session, our first initial one, and that's usually like asking like historical questions, getting a good idea of like what's been going on in your life, what's currently happening for you, what are you experiencing. So that one's more like just a talk session that we get an idea because there's just a lot of information. And then the second session, I'll engage with them and like get a sense. Usually what I do, and other art therapists might do it differently, is like we might chat about like how are things going for you, how are those challenges that you talked about last time, and then I get a sense of like an intervention, or art directive that I might provide to a client. So for example, it might be, like I said before, using color, lines, and shapes. Can you express your experience with work this week? Something like that, And they're like, okay. So they have their art materials, which whether the ones that are provided or the ones they have at home. And I say, okay, let's try the colored pencils today. Or let's try the three that I had mentioned. From those, if they're having a hard time starting, like maybe just choose a color that stands out to you. Choosing that, or choosing a medium that stands out to you. And, I'm like, no right or wrong. I always say no right or wrong. I won't be like, oh, no, red, no. So I always tell them no right or wrong. And so they could start, doing it that way. So using the color lines and shapes. And like I said, I'm usually pretty quiet during that experience for them to be really into that other side of their brain while they're expressing themselves, and just, quietly observing the process. And then I might ask them, like, to find a place where they feel like they're in a sense of like completion, that they created what they wanted to create. So usually this will be like, depending on how much they make, art making they're into, is like 20 minutes of our session of the art making. And then after that, the rest of our time is processing. So asking them, like I asked, like said that, like, oh, I observed that you did green first. How was that for you? Or, or I just might ask in general, how was that experience of creating for you today? Oh man, I didn't expect all this to come out, or, something like that, or it was really scary, or we'll process that as well. Or I didn't like the crayon, or, we can process all those different things. And then we kind of explore it further, asking different questions, relating back to the artwork. And I think it's really helpful too, is like you have this thing outside of yourself. So it's a little bit, in some ways, a little bit less scary for people because they can talk about this thing rather than, oh my gosh, I'm blah, 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 I'm blah, 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 that they have this externalization of it's on the paper. Let's talk, and then I'll return back. Like, let's talk about, this section. I'll usually ask them to like hold it up too, or if our internet connection is kind of wonky, like send a picture to me so that we can, look at it together. And then, at the end, I may ask them to create a title or use 3 words to describe it. So that's connecting the right and the left brain. So furthering that processing of what they created. So hopefully what that experience is that they assign meaning to what they created and they get deeper into, oh yeah, my work was actually it's really tough. Or it might, the opposite, that might be like, whoa, okay, you did a lot of actually colors where you said they were positive for you, and then this bit is feels negative to you, and they'll observe, oh, okay, yeah, actually, yeah, there are these other things. So I think that really helps us. I said I keep repeating the word, is just going deeper. And always, I think I say to the client's consent. I'm always like, is this okay with you? Even with what I say, like, does this fit for you? If I observe this, does this fit for you? Is this something that you are in agreement with? Or so I always check in on that too. So like I said, it's really not about assumptions of me saying, oh, you did this and this, therefore you're this. Mm-hmm. Absolutely try to go opposite of that experience and really give them the space to observe and make those kind of meanings and understandings for themselves.
Yeah. Thank you for walking me through that process. I think that's helpful for the listeners and the viewers as well, because just know a question is, what does therapy look like? But also specifically, like, what does art therapy look like? So it's super helpful for you to explain all those pieces, because it is important for people to know what to expect or kind of what it's going to be like. And that also makes it feel a little bit more, comfortable maybe walking in, or signing on to the video. Right.
Yeah. And, and some art therapists might have a different style than me, or we're trained a little bit differently. But I think generally that's kind of like the basic, right? Some people might just start off, I'm going to start art making. Okay. So it also depends on personalities too, if they want to start doing that way. But yeah, I think that's kind of like the kind of like basic like structure I like to share with my clients.
Got it. Yeah. Before we end, I know it sounds like you're possibly going to do that art curation box maybe with some clients in the future. Is there anything else you're working on or taking on that you want the listeners or viewers to know about?
I think, I just wanted to say that, like, I have spots available in my private practice now. I practice in California, so even though I'm located in Los Angeles, if you're in the Bay Area, I'm able to support you. So I am doing all telehealth right now. So that box I think will be really helpful to share with others. And my website is CuriousPurpose.com, or Curious Purpose is the name of my practice. So that's, or you could always search Marian Formanes therapist, and I think I should pop up. So if you're interested in learning more, feel free to reach out.
Nice. I will put your website in the show notes and in the description. That way the listeners and viewers can just click on it and they can go, straight to your website to find out more about you. And then also if they're interested in receiving therapy services from you and they reside in the state of California, then they can reach out and
Awesome.
and chat with you. Okay. Well, thank you so much for doing this. It was a pleasure having you on, and I think we all took away so much information. And also, I'm like, now I'm wanting to do art, just myself in general. Like I think it's interesting because when I meet people, especially such as yourself, that are very like passionate about what you do, like it kind of like I get excited too in a way for it. And I love art as well, but I paint. I'm actually a painter. Now I want to paint. So anyway, but yeah, so thank you so much. Thank you so much for being on. Okay.
Thank you for having me, Robin.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.